The apartment smelled like home. Not the sterile tang of dungeon stone or the copper bite of spilled blood, but rice steaming in the cooker and the faint trace of his mother's jasmine tea. Sung Jinwoo stood in the doorway of their small Seoul apartment boots. Still laced the weight of Jeju Island's ant corpses, a memory that hadn't quite left his shoulders. His sister Jinna sat cross-legged on the floor, textbooks scattered around her like fallen soldiers. She glanced up and her eyes went straight to the tear in his jacket sleeve. "You're going again." Not a question. Jinwoo unbuckled his belt, the one reinforced to carry daggers that could carve through S-rank monsters. He set it on the table without looking at her. "Just came back." "Then why do you still look like you're halfway out the door?" Fair point. Jinwoo had never been good at pretending. He crossed to the kitchen, poured himself water from the kettle. The glass felt fragile in his hand, a thing that could shatter if he gripped too hard. Everything felt that way now. His mother appeared in the hallway, moving quietly, as she always did. Park Kyung-hye had been bedridden for years, trapped in eternal slumber, while the bills piled high and Jinwoo bled in E-rank gates for scraps. He'd pulled her back from that edge with holy water of life, a prize he'd earned in blood. She was awake now, alive. But the years hadn't been kind, and her eyes carried the weight of a mother who knew her son walked into fire for breakfast. She didn't say anything, just looked at him the same way she had when he was 12 and lying about scraped knees. The same way she had when he'd come home after his first gate clothes torn and pride shredded. Then soft as rain, "Don't make me wait again." 4 words, no tears, no pleading, just a line drawn in the sand as clear as any formation he'd ever deployed. Jinwoo set the glass down. His throat felt tight. "I'll come back, not I won't go." He'd never been one for empty promises. His mother knew that. She nodded once, then turned back toward her room. Jinna watched the whole exchange with the kind of silence that spoke louder than shouting. When their mother's door clicked shut, Jinna finally spoke. "You know she doesn't sleep well when you're gone. I know. And you're still going to go." "Yeah." She grabbed a pillow and hurled it at his head. He caught it without looking, muscle memory from 1,000 ambushes, making the motion automatic. Jinna scowled. "You're impossible." "Yeah." But he wasn't smiling, neither was she. They both knew the math. Gates didn't close themselves. Monsters didn't stop spawning because a hunter wanted a quiet dinner with family. The world had a way of demanding more than anyone wanted to give, and Jinwoo had stopped pretending he could negotiate. His phone buzzed. Association alert. He pulled it from his pocket, the screen harsh against the warm light of the apartment. Red gate. Emergency classification. Location downtown Seoul. Estimated rank unknown. Mana readings erratic. Unknown rank meant trouble. Erratic readings meant worse. Red gates were bad enough on their own time-locked dungeons that didn't let you leave until the boss died. This one sounded like it was trying to rewrite the rulebook. Jinna was watching him. She'd seen the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared without him thinking about it. When now? She didn't argue. Just stood, walked over, and punched him in the arm. Hard enough to mean it. "Come back!" He caught her wrist gently, held it for a second. Then let go. "I will." He meant it. That was the thing about Jinwoo. When he made a promise, it wasn't theater. It was a contract written in the same cold logic that kept him alive in places where stronger hunters died screaming. He grabbed his jacket, the torn one, because there wasn't time to change. His daggers were already in the shadows, waiting. Kamish's wrath and Demon King's daggers, blades that had tasted dragon marrow and demon blood. They'd be ready when he called. The door closed behind him with a soft click. In the hallway, he paused just for a breath. Let himself feel the weight of what he was leaving behind. His mother's quiet fear, his sister's anger that was really just love with teeth. Then he stepped into the elevator and the weight shifted, became something else. Purpose, direction, the same cold clarity that had carried him through Jeju, through the Demon King's castle, through every nightmare that thought it could break him. The streets of Seoul blurred past as he moved, not running but not wasting time either. People gave him space without knowing why, some instinct in their hindbrain recognizing a predator, even when it wore a human face. The gate was easy to find. You didn't need GPS to track a tear in reality. The air around it felt wrong, like reality was holding its breath. Association hunters had already cordoned off the area, their faces pale under the streetlights. One of them recognized Jinwoo. The man's relief was immediate and obvious. Hunter sung. We were told to wait for backup, but the gate's destabilizing. Mana's signature keeps spiking. Jinwoo looked at the gate. It pulsed like a wound, colors that didn't belong in nature bleeding at the edges. Red gates were supposed to be stable until entry. This one looked like it was trying to turn itself inside out. How many inside? None yet. Standing order was to wait for S-rank confirmation. Smart. Also pointless now that he was here. Jinwoo stepped forward, felt the gates pull like fingers made of static. I'll handle it. Sir Protocol says if this gate collapses with hunters inside, they're dead. If I go in alone and it collapses, I'm dead. Math's better my way. The hunter opened his mouth, then closed it. You didn't argue with Sung Jinwoo about dungeon mathematics. The man had written the textbook in corpses and survival rates. Jinwoo walked through the gate. The transition should have been instant. One step in Seoul, next step in whatever frozen hell the red gate had prepared. But something caught. Reality stuttered, and for a moment, Jinwoo felt like he was being pulled in two directions at once. The mana around him screamed. Not metaphorically. Actual sound like the universe itself was tearing at the seams. He tried to pull back, but the gate had him now, dragging him forward through a space that wasn't space, past rules that weren't rules. Then it spat him out. Jinwoo hit grass. Not dungeon stone or ice or the usual terrain of manufactured death. Actual grass wet with dew and smelling like earth. He rolled, came up in a crouch, daggers already forming in his hands from the shadows. But there was nothing to fight. Just hills rolling away under a sky that looked too clean, too old. Stars he didn't recognize scattered across black velvet. The moon hung low and heavy, more silver than Seoul's anemic glow. This wasn't a dungeon. Dungeons had walls. Rules, a script written by whatever system governed gates. This was something else entirely. Jinwoo stood slowly, every sense screaming warnings his brain couldn't quite process. The air tasted different. The mana felt different, like trying to breathe through wet cloth. It was there, he could feel it, but it resisted him in ways he'd never encountered. He reached for his shadows, the army that lived in the dark spaces of his soul. They came, but slower. Reluctant. Like wading through mud instead of water. 3 shapes materialized beside him. Igris, the knight who'd been a boss before becoming a soldier. Beru, still riding the high of Jeju's massacre. Tusk, quiet and methodical as winter, they stood ready. But Jinwoo could feel the strain. Summoning them here cost more than it should. Keeping them would cost more still. King Beru's voice rasped in his mind, hungry and confused. This place, It rejects us. Yeah. Jinwoo felt it too. Whatever world this was, it had its own rules. And his power absolute in Seoul was just another foreign element here. Strong, but not untouchable. He looked around, trying to orient himself. Hills. Forest in the distance. Mountains beyond that, crowned with snow that gleamed under starlight. And somewhere to the south, he thought he saw lights. Distant. Flickering. The kind that came from fire, not electricity. A settlement. Maybe, or a trap. Jinwoo dismissed Tusk and Baru. With a thought felt, the mana cost dropped to something manageable. Kept Igris because the night was efficient, disciplined. A shadow that knew how to wait. Stay close. Don't engage unless I give the word. Igris inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement that transcended language. The night fell into step behind Jinwoo, silent as midnight. They moved toward the lights. Not running because running suggested panic or prey. Just walking steady and purposeful through grass that whispered against their legs and air that tasted like rain and old stone. Jinwoo's phone was dead. Not out of battery, just dead. The screen wouldn't respond, the circuits fried by whatever transit had dragged him here. No GPS, no communication. No way to tell the association he was lost in a place that shouldn't exist. He thought about his mother's words. Don't make me wait again. He thought about Jinnah's punch, the way she'd tried to make it hurt because pain was easier than fear. Then he filed it away, locked it in the same place where he kept every promise he'd ever made. He'd get back. He always did. The method was just going to require more work than usual. The lights grew closer. Torches, he realized. Actual torches burning with real flame. They marked the edge of a forest, thick and dark, and older than anything Seoul had to offer. And between him and those trees, something moved. Jinwoo stopped. Igris materialized, fully armor solid and sword drawn, a statue of war waiting for orders. The movement resolved into shapes. Men, he thought, armored lightly, moving with the practiced silence of soldiers who knew their ground. Bows in hand, arrows knocked but not drawn. Yet. They'd been watching him. Probably since he landed. Professional hunters then, or this world's equivalent. One of them stepped forward close enough that Jinwoo could make out details. Young but not green. Eyes that had seen combat and survived it. The kind of steady calm that came from discipline, not arrogance. The man spoke. You walk strange ground, traveler, and stranger still with that shadow at your back. English. Not Korean, but Jinwoo's system-granted comprehension made translation automatic. He studied the speaker, cataloging threats and tells. The man's hand was steady on his bow. The others had spread out in a formation that spoke of training and trust. Not amateurs, and not immediately hostile, which was better than most dungeons offered. Jinwoo kept his hands visible, daggers still sheathed in shadow. Igris stood ready but didn't move. I'm not here by choice. Gate malfunction. The speaker's eyes narrowed. He glanced at his companions, some signal passing between them that Jinwoo couldn't read. Then back to Jinwoo. You speak of gates and shadows, as if they serve you. That is the language of Mordor, of servants to the enemy. Enemy. Capital E. That meant something specific here, something these soldiers feared enough to hunt in the dark for it. Jinwoo filed that away. Morgul, enemy. Words that carried weight in this place, the way S rank carried weight back home. I don't serve anyone. The shadows serve me. Not a boast, just fact. But the soldiers didn't lower their bows. The speaker studied him for a long moment. Then, you will come with us. Captain Faramir will want words with a man who commands darkness and claims no master. Not a request. Jinwoo considered his options. He could fight, probably win. These men were good, but they weren't dungeon bosses. Ygritte alone could carve through them in seconds. But that wouldn't get him answers, wouldn't tell him where he was or how to get back. And killing people who were just doing their job sat wrong the way it always did when the threat wasn't monsters. He thought about his mother again. Don't make me wait. Getting information was faster than fighting blind. And he could always fight later if these people proved hostile. Jinwoo nodded once. Ygritte shifted questioning but held position. Lead the way. The soldiers relaxed fractionally, not trusting but less ready to kill. The speaker gestured, and two men moved to flank Jinwoo. Not close enough to grab, but near enough to react if he tried something. They walked into the forest torchlight dancing against ancient trees. Behind them, the empty hills stretched away under stars Jinwoo didn't recognize. And somewhere impossibly far, but tied by a promise stronger than distance, his family waited. He'd come back. He always did. The method was just going to be complicated. The forest closed around them like a fist. No streetlights here, no neon bleeding through smog. Just torches held by men who moved like they'd been born, knowing how to be quiet, and trees so old they made Seoul's concrete towers feel like children playing dress-up. Jinwoo walked in the center of their formation, not quite a prisoner, but definitely not free. Ygritte trailed behind him, a presence the rangers kept glancing at when they thought he wouldn't notice. They were nervous. Good. Nervous people stayed sharp. The one who'd spoken earlier, the young one with the steady hands, fell into step beside Jinwoo. Not close enough to crowd, but near enough to talk without the others hearing. Faramir will ask you questions. Answer them straight, and you might leave Ithilien with your head still attached to your neck. Jinwoo glanced at him. Ithilien. Another word to file away, another piece of a map he didn't have. And if I don't answer, then we'll have to assume you're a servant of the shadow. And we put down servants of the shadow. Simple. Practical. Jinwoo could respect that. He'd killed enough monsters wearing human faces to know that sometimes the only answer was a blade. I'll answer. Don't expect the answers to make sense. The ranger almost smiled. Few things do these days. They walked in silence after that, boots crunching on old leaves and ground that smelled like rain, even when it hadn't fallen. The air still felt wrong to Jinwoo, like breathing through a filter that didn't quite fit. His mana reserves were full, but accessing them took conscious effort in a way it never had back home. He tested it quietly, reaching for the shadows. They responded, but sluggish, like trying to run underwater. Not impossible, just harder than it should be. Whatever this place was, it had rules. And those rules didn't care that Sung Jinwoo was an S-rank hunter who'd eaten a dragon's heart and walked out of the Demon King's castle with new soldiers. Here he was just a man with power that didn't quite fit. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it sharpened him, made him focus in ways he hadn't needed to since the early days when every gate was a roll of dice weighted toward death. The torches ahead multiplied. More rangers, Jinwoo realized, stationed at what looked like a forward camp. Tents made of material that blended with the forest, positioned where the trees provided cover and the sight lines stayed clear. Military discipline, the kind that came from fighting wars that didn't end. They passed through without stopping, though. Jinwoo felt eyes on him from every shadow, watching. calculating, trying to decide if he was a threat or just another problem in a world that already had too many. Eventually, they reached a clearing, not large, just enough space for a small command post. A man stood there studying a map spread across a makeshift table. Older than the others, but not by much. The kind of age that came from responsibility more than years. He looked up as they approached, and Jinwoo saw the same eyes the young ranger had. Steady, careful. The eyes of someone who'd learned to measure threats before they could kill him. Captain Faramir, the young ranger, said, "We found this one beyond our perimeter." He was not alone. Faramir's gaze shifted to Igris, who stood motionless as stone. The knight's armor caught torchlight and seemed to swallow it, turning flame into something darker. A shadow warrior. Faramir's voice was level, but Jinwoo heard the edge underneath. "And you command it, yes. Not a servant of Morgul, then. They do not command, they obey. I told your men, I don't serve anyone." Faramir walked closer, studying Jinwoo the way a hunter might study tracks in snow, looking for the truth hidden in the details. "You speak with strange words. Gate, malfunction. As if the barriers between worlds were mechanisms to be broken. That is not the language of Middle-earth. Middle-earth. Jinwoo filed that away too. Not a dungeon name, a place. An actual place with geography and history, and people who'd never heard of the Hunters Association. "I'm not from here," Jinwoo said. "Simple, true. Where I come from, gates are portals. Dungeons, places where monsters spawn, and hunters go to kill them before they break through into our world. And you are a hunter." "Yes." Faramir was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Then show me." Jinwoo raised an eyebrow. "Your power. If you command shadows as you claim, show me. But know this, if what emerges threatens my men, we will put you down. Arrows are faster than most men realize." Jinwoo looked around. 20 rangers, maybe more, all with bows drawn, now arrows nocked. Not pointed at him yet, but ready. One word from Faramir, and he'd have 20 shafts in him before he could blink. Igris could stop maybe half. Jinwoo himself could probably dodge the rest if he was lucky. But that would mean fighting, and fighting would mean killing, and killing these men wouldn't get him any closer to going home. He thought about his mother's face. "Don't make me wait again." He thought about Gina's punch, the way she'd tried to put all her fear into her fist, because she didn't know what else to do with it. Then he reached into the shadows. The summoning came slower here. Back in Seoul, it was instant thought and execution happening in the same breath. Here it took effort, concentration. Like pushing through resistance he couldn't see. But it worked. Baru materialized beside Igris, all predator grace and barely contained violence. The ant commander stood taller than a man, chitin armor black as midnight mandibles that could shear through steel. His eyes, if they could be called eyes, fixed on the rangers, with a kind of hunger that didn't care about tactics or mercy. The rangers tensed. Several arrows drew back to full pull. Easy Jinwoo said not to the rangers, but to Baru. The shadow settled violence, coiling back like a spring wound, tight. Still dangerous, but leashed. Waiting for orders that Jinwoo hadn't given. Faramir hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. He just studied Baru the way he'd studied Jinwoo, cataloging threat and capability. "That is no servant of Morgul," he said quietly. "That is something else entirely. Something that should not exist in this world. But it does," Jinwoo said, "because I'm here. And I don't know why, and I don't know how to get back." I'm not your enemy, and neither are my shadows. Words are wind, a voice said from behind Faramir. Another ranger, this one older with scars that spoke of close calls and bad luck. How do we know this is not some new trick of the enemy, a way to infiltrate our ranks with something we cannot detect? Fair question. Jinwoo would have asked the same thing. Test me, he said to Faramir. Give me a task. Something that proves I'm not working for whoever this enemy is. Faramir studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to the scarred ranger. Ma Blung, the patrol route you scouted yesterday. The orcs gathering near the eastern ridge. Are they still there? Last I checked, yes. Maybe 30. Scouts for a larger force most like. Faramir turned back to Jinwoo. Orcs serve the enemy. They are creatures of malice and cruelty, twisted by the shadow into mockeries of life. If you are not of the shadow, you will not hesitate to kill them. Jinwoo thought about the monsters he'd fought. Goblins and orcs and things without names, all teeth and hunger, and the kind of evil that didn't need philosophy to justify itself. He'd killed thousands, tens of thousands if he counted the shadows he'd raised from corpses. One more pile wouldn't make a difference. Where, he said? Faramir gestured to Mablung, who pulled out a rough map and pointed. Here, 2 hours march east. They're using an old ruin as a staging point. We were planning to hit them at dawn, but if you can clear them now, consider it done. Faramir nodded slowly. Then I will send men with you to observe. Jinwoo shook his head. Send them if you want, but they'll just slow me down. The rangers bristled at that, but Faramir held up a hand. You do not know the terrain. You do not know the enemy's tactics. Pride is a luxury we cannot afford in war. Not pride, Jinwoo said. Efficiency. I work alone because adding people to the equation usually means protecting them instead of killing the target. Your men are good, but they're not dungeon hunters. This is what I do. Faramir's eyes narrowed. Damrod, he said to the young ranger who'd first spoken to Jinwoo. Go with him. Observe only. Do not engage unless the situation becomes desperate. The young ranger Damrod nodded, though Jinwoo could see the uncertainty in his eyes. And you, Faramir, said to Jinwoo, if you betray this trust, I will hunt you myself. There is no shadow deep enough to hide you from the rangers of Ithilien. Jinwoo met his gaze level and cold. I don't betray people who haven't betrayed me first. Simple. True. The kind of promise that didn't need elaboration. Faramir held his gaze for another moment, then nodded. Damrod will show you the way. Jinwoo dismissed Baru with a thought felt the mana cost ease back to manageable levels. Kept Igris because the knight was patient and wouldn't complain about a 2-hour march through hostile territory. Damrod led him out of the camp, moving with the kind of quiet competence Jinwoo recognized from professional soldiers. The kind who'd survived enough fights to know when to be loud and when to disappear. They walked in silence for the first hour. The forest changed around them, growing darker and older. The trees here felt different, like they'd seen things trees shouldn't see and remembered all of it. Eventually, Damrod spoke. Faramir doesn't trust easily. Smart. He's the best man I know. Jinwoo glanced at him. Then he'll understand when I prove him right. Damrod almost smiled at that. What are you really? Not some corrupted servant of the shadow? I can see that much, but you're not of Middle-earth either. You carry yourself like a warrior. But your speech is strange. Your weapons stranger still. Jinwoo thought about how to explain Seoul. Gates, the system. The years of crawling through dungeons while stronger hunters got rich and he got scraps. "Where I come from, the world broke," he said finally. Portals started opening. Monsters came through. Some people got power to fight them. I was one of those people. And the shadows. My power. I kill monsters and sometimes I can raise them as soldiers. They serve me absolutely. No will of their own. Just tools. That sounds lonely. Jinwoo thought about Ygritte, who'd been an enemy before becoming an ally. About Beru, who called him king with genuine reverence. About the army of shadows, who would die for him without hesitation, because they had no choice. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They walked in silence after that. The ruin appeared through the trees like a broken tooth. Old stone, the kind that predated anything Jinwoo had seen in Seoul. Parts of walls still stood, but most had collapsed into rubble that the forest was slowly reclaiming. And among the rubble, orcs. Jinwoo studied them from the cover of the trees. They looked like goblins, if goblins had been built by someone who valued function over form. Thick muscle-crude armor weapons that were more bludgeon than blade. They moved with the kind of casual violence that suggested they'd kill for fun if given half a chance. 30, like Mablung had said. Maybe a few more. No clear organization, just groups clustered around fires or standing watch with the kind of attention span that spoke of boredom and brutality. Easy targets. Jinwoo turned to Damrod. "Stay here. Don't interfere." Damrod's hand went to his bow. "If you fall, I won't." Not arrogance, just math. These weren't S-rank monsters. They weren't even D-rank. They were foot soldiers, the kind that existed to die in large numbers while the real threats stayed hidden. Jinwoo had killed things that could eat these orcs for breakfast. He stepped out of the trees. The orcs noticed him immediately. Shouts in a language that sounded like gravel grinding against rust. Weapons drawn, bodies turning toward him with the kind of focused aggression that said they'd been waiting for something to kill. Jinwoo walked toward them, not running, not hurrying, just walking like he had all the time in the world. 20 feet away, he stopped. The orcs charged. Jinwoo reached into the shadows and pulled. Ygritte materialized in front of him, sword already drawn. The night moved like poetry, written in violence blade carving through the first orc, before the creature even realized it was dead. Beru appeared to Jinwoo's left, all speed and slaughter. The ant commander tore through 2 orcs, in the same breath mandibles shearing armor like paper. Tusk rose behind them, polearm already spinning. The shadow warrior didn't bother with finesse, just brought the weapon down in wide arcs that cleared space like a reaper harvesting grain. Jinwoo pulled Kamish's wrath from the shadows, felt the daggers settle into his hands like old friends. The blades hummed with power, dragon-forged steel that had tasted god blood and wanted more. He moved, not the careful, measured movements of someone trying to survive. The efficient, brutal economy of someone who'd done this 10,000 times and knew exactly how much force it took to end a life. 3 orcs died before they understood what was happening. 5 more before they could coordinate a response. By the time the survivors tried to retreat, it was too late. Jinwoo's shadows had them surrounded. The fight lasted 90 seconds. When it was over, the ruins were silent except for the crackle of dying fires and the drip of blood on stone. 30 orcs dead. 0 casualties on Jinwoo's side. He dismissed Beru, and Tusk kept Ygritte because the night was good at standing watch. Then he turned back toward the trees where Damrod had been watching. The ranger emerged slowly, eyes wide and face pale. He looked at the carnage, then at Jinwoo, then back at the bodies. That was... He stopped, tried again. I have never seen anything killed with such efficiency. Jinwoo sheathed his daggers back into shadow. I told you, this is what I do. Damrod swallowed hard. Faramir will want to know everything. Then, let's not keep him waiting. They walked back through the forest, and this time Damrod kept more distance. Not fear exactly, more like the instinctive wariness of someone who'd just realized the predator walking beside him was far more dangerous than they'd thought. Jinwoo understood. He'd seen that look before back in Seoul, the way people's eyes changed when they realized he wasn't just strong, he was something else entirely. It never stopped feeling lonely. But loneliness was the price of power, and Jinwoo had stopped pretending it wasn't worth it. They reached Faramir's camp as false dawn started painting the sky gray. The captain was waiting along with most of his rangers, all of them watching as Jinwoo and Damrod emerged from the trees. Faramir's eyes went to Damrod first. Well? The young ranger's voice was steady, but Jinwoo heard the tremor underneath. 30 orcs. Dead in less than 2 minutes. I have never witnessed such slaughter. Faramir turned to Jinwoo, and there was something different in his eyes now. Not trust, not yet. But the beginning of respect, the kind earned in blood and proven in action. You kept your word. I always do. Faramir nodded slowly, then gestured to one of the tents. Rest, eat. When the sun rises, we will speak of what comes next. Jinwoo thought about arguing about demanding answers and maps and a way home. But he was tired, and the mana cost of maintaining Igris in this world was starting to add up. He nodded once, then followed a ranger to a tent that smelled like old canvas and wood smoke. Inside alone, except for Igris standing silent guard, Jinwoo let himself think about Seoul, about his apartment and his family, and the promise he'd made. He'd get back. He always did. The method was just taking longer than expected. The tent smelled like old leather and strategy. Maps covered the table, hand-drawn, and weathered marking terrain Jinwoo didn't recognize. Rivers with names he couldn't pronounce. Mountains that looked too tall to be real. And everywhere notations in a script that his system translated automatically but still felt foreign. Faramir stood across from him, one hand resting on the map like he was holding down the world itself. Dawn light filtered through the canvas painting, everything in shades of gold and shadow. You fight like no one I have ever seen, Faramir said. Not a compliment. Just observation delivered with the same careful weight he gave everything. Your shadows move with precision. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Jinwoo didn't respond. Compliments made him uncomfortable, especially when they came from people trying to figure out if they should kill him. That troubles me, Faramir continued. In my experience, such efficiency comes from one of two sources. Either you have fought so many battles that violence has become routine, or you are not entirely human, and killing is simply what you were made to do. Jinwoo thought about the system. The way it had turned him from the weakest hunter into something that could stand against national threats. The leveling, the quests, the constant pressure to become stronger or die trying. Both, he said finally. I've fought more battles than I can count. And something changed me. Made me better at this than I want to be. Faramir's expression didn't shift, but something in his posture eased slightly. Honesty, Jinwoo had learned, bought more trust than bravado. You said you come from a place where gates open and monsters emerge, where hunters fight to keep them contained. Yes, and these shadows you command, they were once your enemies. Some of them. I kill monsters. Sometimes I can raise them afterward. Turn them into soldiers. That is necromancy. Not an accusation. Just a statement of fact delivered without heat or judgment. If that's what you call it here, Jinwoo said. Where I'm from, it's just a type of power. No different than fire magic or physical enhancement. Faramir was quiet for a long moment, studying the maps like they held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. In Middle-earth, necromancy is the domain of the enemy, of Sauron and his servants. To raise the dead and bind them to your will is to practice the arts of Morgul, and those who walk that path do not return from it unchanged. Jinwoo thought about that, about the weight of every shadow he carried, every soldier who had no choice but to obey, about the loneliness of power that couldn't be shared or questioned. I'm already changed, he said. That happened before I ever raised my first shadow. The question isn't whether the power costs something. It's whether I can control the cost. And can you? Jinwoo met his gaze level and cold. So far. Another silence. Outside the tent, Jinwoo could hear the camp waking up. Men moving with purpose, preparing for a day of war that would look exactly like yesterday and tomorrow. Damrod says you refused to harm my rangers, Faramir said. Even when they could have been obstacles to your escape. They weren't my enemies. Many men would have killed them anyway. To simplify the situation, I don't kill people who haven't given me reason to. Faramir almost smiled at that. Almost. A luxury in these times. But one I appreciate. He straightened, pulling his attention from the maps. You understand that I cannot simply release you. Not yet. You are a stranger in a land at war wielding power that resembles our enemy's darkest arts. Even if I believe you mean no harm, others will not be so easily convinced. Jinwoo had expected as much. What do you need? Time? Observation? Proof that your shadows serve you and not some darker purpose. How long? Faramir gestured to the maps. We are rangers of Ithilien, the forward scouts of Gondor. Our task is to harry the enemy's forces, to deny them safe passage through these lands, and to gather intelligence on their movements. If you wish to prove yourself, fight beside us. Let us see how you conduct yourself in sustained conflict, not just a single ambush. Jinwoo thought about his family waiting in Seoul, about his mother's quiet command and his sister's fear. Every day here was a day. They'd worry a day. The association would search for him and find nothing. But he also understood Faramir's position. If their situations were reversed, Jinwoo wouldn't trust himself either. How long? He asked again. A week. Perhaps 2, depending on what intelligence we gather. Fight alongside us, follow our commands, and prove that your power serves life rather than death. And if I refuse, then you remain a prisoner. Treated well, but confined. And when this war ends, if it ever ends, we will decide your fate then. Not a threat. Just math delivered with the same practical efficiency Jinwoo recognized from his own calculations. He thought about fighting his way out. He could do it, probably. The Rangers were skilled, but they weren't prepared for what Baru could do at full strength, or what would happen if Jinwoo stopped holding back. But that would mean becoming the enemy they feared. And more importantly, it wouldn't get him home. Just lost in a world he didn't understand, burning bridges with the only people who might help him. 2 weeks, Jinwoo said. I'll fight with you, but I need something in return. Faramir raised an eyebrow. Information about this world, about where I am and how I might get back. That seems fair. And one more thing. Faramir waited. I don't take orders that conflict with my principles. I'll fight your enemies. I'll follow tactical commands in battle. But I won't kill prisoners, and I won't harm civilians. Not for any reason. Faramir studied him for a moment, then nodded. I would not ask you to do otherwise. We are not orcs to slaughter the helpless for sport. They shook hands, and Jinwoo felt the calluses on Faramir's palm. Warriors' hands shaped by years of holding weapons and making hard choices. The tent flap opened, and Damrod stepped inside. Captain, scouts report movement on the northern approach. Looks like a supply column, maybe 20 orcs with war gear. Faramir turned to Jinwoo. Your first test. We will strike the column and seize their supplies. You will fight with us, not as commander, but as soldier. Can you follow orders from someone other than yourself? Jinwoo thought about the association, about taking missions from people he didn't respect because the gates needed clearing, and hunters were the only ones who could do it. I can follow orders, as long as they make sense. Faramir almost smiled again. Then gear up. We move in 10 minutes. The forest swallowed sound. Jinwoo moved with the rangers, matching their pace, learning their rhythm. They communicated in hand signals and minute changes in posture, a language built over years of fighting together. He'd dismissed Egress to conserve mana, relying on his own abilities and the daggers that never left his side. The rangers had noticed, filed it away. More data for their ongoing assessment. Damrod moved beside him close enough to observe, but not so close as to crowd. The young ranger had been quiet since watching Jinwoo butcher 30 orcs like it was routine maintenance. You fight differently when you're alone, Damrod said quietly. Jinwoo glanced at him. Different how? More controlled. When you killed those orcs, it was efficient but brutal. Now you're holding back, because I'm working with people instead of removing obstacles. Damrod considered that. Faramir thinks you're dangerous. He's right. But he also thinks you can be trusted. That remains to be seen. They moved in silence after that. Boots finding purchase on ground that had seen countless skirmishes. The forest here felt wounded trees, scarred, and undergrowth trampled by forces that didn't care about the land they ruined. Ahead, Faramir raised a fist. The rangers stopped instantly, melting into cover with the kind of synchronization that spoke of absolute discipline. Jinwoo stopped too, though his instinct was to keep moving. He scanned the area, cataloging terrain and sightlines the way he'd learned in 1,000 dungeon raids. The orc column came into view through the trees. 20 warriors, like the scout had said. But these weren't the disorganized rabble from the ruins. These moved with purpose, weapons maintained, armor serviceable. Professional soldiers in an army that valued results over aesthetics. They were escorting 3 wagons loaded with supplies. Food, Jinwoo guessed. Maybe weapons. Resources for whatever force was gathering deeper in enemy territory. Faramir moved among his rangers, giving orders too quiet for Jinwoo to hear. The men shifted positions, drawing bows, preparing for the kind of ambush that started with arrows and ended with whatever came after. Jinwoo watched, learning their tactics. They positioned themselves in a V formation, focusing fire lanes where the orcs would have no cover. When the ambush triggered, the enemy would have seconds to react before half of them were already dead. Efficient. Brutal in its own way. Different from Jinwoo's approach, but no less effective. Faramir appeared beside him, moving silent as thought. When the arrows fly, you hold position until I give the signal. If they break toward us, you stop them. If they run, let them go. We want the supplies, not glory. Jinwoo nodded. One more thing, Faramir said, quieter now. My men are watching you. They know what you can do, but they don't know if they can trust you. If you betray us here, none of you will leave this forest alive. Understood? Faramir held his gaze for a moment, then melted back into the trees. The column moved closer, orcs talking in their grinding language. They weren't expecting trouble. Why would they? This was their territory patrolled by their forces. The Rangers were ghosts, stories told to frightened soldiers who'd never actually encountered them. Faramir whistled. A bird call perfectly executed. The Rangers loosed. 20 arrows, 20 targets. 15 orcs died in the first volley struck before they even understood they were under attack. The survivors roared, weapons drawn, looking for enemies they couldn't see. One of them barked orders, trying to organize a defense. Too late. The Rangers' second volley cut down 3 more. The remaining 2 broke for the trees, abandoning the wagons. But they ran toward Jinwoo's position. He stepped out of cover, daggers already in hand. The orcs saw him and charged, thinking him an easier target than invisible archers. Jinwoo moved. The first orc swung a crude axe. Jinwoo ducked under it, drove Kamish's wrath through the creature's throat, and pulled the blade free before the body hit the ground. The second orc was smarter, trying to use its reach advantage with a spear. Jinwoo caught the thrust on Demon King's daggers, twisted, and turned the orc's momentum into a stumble. His follow-up strike took it in the spine, severing nerves and motor control. Both orcs dead in less than 5 seconds. The forest went silent again. Jinwoo straightened, flicking blood from his blades before dismissing them back into shadow. The Rangers emerged from cover, moving to secure the wagons and check the dead. Faramir approached, studying Jinwoo with the same measuring gaze. Well executed. You followed orders. They made sense. A pragmatist. Good. War has no room for glory seekers. He turned to his men. Strip anything useful. Food, weapons, intelligence, if they're carrying any. We move out in 5 minutes. The Rangers worked with practiced efficiency, searching bodies and loading supplies onto their own packs. Jinwoo watched, noting the way they moved, the way they prioritized. These weren't just soldiers. They were survivors in a conflict that had been grinding on long enough to wear down anyone who hadn't learned to adapt. Damrod appeared at his elbow. You're holding back. Jinwoo glanced at him. What makes you say that? You killed those orcs with 2 daggers. No shadows, no army. Just you and steel. That's what Faramir wanted to see. Is it? Or are you conserving strength because you don't know how long you'll be here? Jinwoo studied the young ranger, sharper than he looked. Both. Damrod nodded slowly. Faramir will appreciate the honesty when you give it to him. The trek back to camp took longer, weighted with supplies and the constant vigilance of men who knew ambushes could come from either direction. Jinwoo fell into the rhythm, moving with the Rangers like he'd been part of their unit for years instead of hours. They reached the camp as afternoon shadows stretched long across the forest floor. Faramir dismissed the men to rest and resupply, then gestured for Jinwoo to follow him. Back in the command tent, the maps looked the same but felt different. Like something had shifted in the short time they'd been gone. You fight well with others, Faramir said. That speaks to discipline. I've worked in teams before, guilds back home, and yet you prefer to work alone. Alone is simpler. No one gets hurt because I made the wrong call. Faramir considered that. A leader's burden, though I suspect you carry more guilt than most. Jinwoo didn't respond to that. Some wounds didn't need to be examined in front of strangers. The column we hit today was small, Faramir continued. A test of your ability to function within our structure. Tomorrow we track something larger, Scouts report an orc war band moving through the southern ridges. 50 warriors, maybe more. Too many to hit directly with our numbers. So we don't hit them directly. Exactly. We harry them. Strike from distance, fall back, deny them rest and certainty. It is slower than open battle, but it bleeds them without risking our own forces. Jinwoo thought about it. Guerrilla tactics, the kind that relied on terrain knowledge and patience. Different from dungeon clearing, where the goal was to reach the boss and end the threat as quickly as possible. But effective in its own way. What do you need from me? Faramir pulled out a different map, this one marked with elevations and narrow passes. Tomorrow you demonstrate whether your power can be used for more than killing. We need to collapse this pass after the warband enters it. Trap them in terrain where arrows do the work, and they cannot close to melee. Can your shadows move that much stone? Jinwoo studied the map, calculating weight and force. Tusk can. He's built for area control. But it'll cost mana, and I still don't know how long that takes to recover in this place. Then use what you need and no more. Efficiency is the difference between victory and survival. Jinwoo almost smiled at that. Practical. Cold. The same logic that had kept him alive through gates that killed hunters with twice his raw power. I'll make it work. Faramir nodded satisfied. Rest. Tomorrow we see if you can build as well as you destroy. That night alone in the tent with Ygritte standing silent guard, Jinwoo thought about Seoul, about his apartment and the smell of his mother's tea, about Gina's textbooks and the way she tried to hide her worry behind sarcasm. 2 weeks. Maybe less if he proved himself quickly. Then Faramir would help him find answers. He had to believe that. The alternative was that he was trapped here in a world at war, while his family waited for someone who might never come home. Jinwoo pulled out his dead phone, looked at the blank screen. No pictures, no contacts. Just a useless piece of metal and glass that meant everything because of what it represented. Connection. Home. A promise he'd made and meant to keep. He set it aside, closed his eyes, and tried to sleep. The forest whispered outside, ancient and patient. It had seen wars before. It would see more after. And somewhere in the dark, Jinwoo dreamed of Seoul. The walls of Minas Tirith groaned like a declaration of war against the sky. 7 tiers of white stone, each one smaller than the last, climbing toward a citadel that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of defiance. Jinwoo had seen large structures before Seoul's skyscrapers, dungeon fortresses that sprawled across impossible dimensions, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't built to impress. It was built to endure. Faramir rode beside him, mounted on a horse that looked like it had seen more campaigns than most soldiers. The Rangers had marched for 3 days to reach Gondor's capital, and Jinwoo had walked every step. Horses didn't like him much, something about the scent of death that clung to shadow wielders. The pass collapse had worked. Tusk had brought down enough rock to trap the orc warband in a killing field where Faramir's archers had done the rest. 50 orcs reduced to scattered corpses and ash, and the Rangers had taken only 2 wounded. Clean, efficient. The kind of victory that bought trust in small increments. But Faramir had made it clear that his trust alone wasn't enough. The White City requires more than my word, he'd said. If you are to move freely in these lands, you must stand before those with wisdom deeper than mine. And there is one in Minas Tirith, whose sight pierces further than any man's. Now approaching the gates, Jinwoo understood what that meant. The people of Gondor watched him pass with the kind of wariness that came from living on a knife's edge for too long. They saw Faramir's rangers and relaxed slightly. Then they saw Jinwoo, and tension returned like a held breath. He didn't blame them. Even without visible shadows, he knew how he looked. The way he moved, the way his gaze tracked threats that weren't there yet. A predator walking among prey, trying to pretend he belonged. They passed through 3 gates, each one larger and more fortified than the last. Guards watched from above, hands near weapons they probably wouldn't have time to draw if things went wrong. Jinwoo kept his hands visible, his posture neutral. He'd learned this dance in Seoul, how to be dangerous without being threatening, how to move through crowds that feared what they didn't understand. The 6th tier held barracks and administrative buildings, organized chaos that spoke of a military preparing for something inevitable. Soldiers drilled in courtyards. Messengers ran between buildings. Smiths worked at forges that never seemed to cool. War preparation. Jinwoo recognized it the way a hunter recognized spoor. Faramir led him to a building that looked official without being ostentatious. Inside, the halls smelled like old paper and strategic exhaustion. Men in robes hurried past, carrying documents and worried expressions. "Wait here," Faramir instructed, gesturing to a bench outside what looked like a council chamber. Jinwoo sat, waited, watched people pretend they weren't watching him. Time passed. An hour, maybe more. Jinwoo had learned patience in dungeons where rushing meant death. So he simply sat and let his mind wander to Seoul, to his apartment and the family that didn't know where he was. 3 weeks now, maybe 4. Time felt strange here, like it moved at a different speed than it should. The council chamber door opened. Faramir emerged, followed by an older man in robes of white that seemed to gather light rather than reflect it. Tall, even slightly bent with age. A staff in one hand, wood that looked older than the city itself. And eyes gray as storm clouds, sharp as winter wind. This was no ordinary administrator. The old man stopped in front of Jinwoo, who stood slowly. They studied each other, and Jinwoo felt something he hadn't felt since facing the Demon King. Recognition. Not of identity, but of weight. This man carried authority that had nothing to do with title or position. It was earned refined, through trials Jinwoo could only guess at. So the old man set his voice, carrying the kind of resonance that suggested he rarely needed to raise it. "You are the one who commands shadows, yet claims no allegiance to the darkness." Statement, not question. Jinwoo met his gaze without flinching. "I am." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in assessment. Jinwoo felt something brush against his mind, gentle but insistent. Not an attack, more like someone testing the quality of steel with a careful tap. He pushed back, not aggressively, but firmly, establishing boundaries. The old man's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something suspected. "Interesting. You resist mental intrusion with practiced ease. That speaks to either natural resistance or extensive experience being probed by hostile forces." Both, Jinwoo replied. "I am Gandalf," the old man said. "Some call me Mithrandir, others have less flattering names. What I am matters less than what I do, which is to see through deception and judge the hearts of those who would walk among the free peoples of Middle-earth." He gestured with his staff. "Walk with me. We have much to discuss." They walked through corridors that led higher into the citadel. Faramir trailed behind, silent observer, to whatever test was unfolding. Gandalf didn't speak immediately. He moved with the kind of deliberate pace that suggested he had time to spare and expected others to match his rhythm. Eventually, they emerged onto a balcony that overlooked the city. Below, Minas Tirith spread out like a military diagram, made real. Above mountains rose in the distance, their peaks hidden in clouds. Faramir tells me you destroyed 50 orcs with minimal risk to his forces, Gandalf said. He also tells me your power resembles necromancy, which troubles him greatly. As it should. Jinwoo leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at a city preparing for war. Where I come from, raising the dead is just a skill, no different than throwing fire or moving faster than normal humans can track. Ah, but that is where you are wrong. Gandalf's tone shifted, taking on the quality of instruction. In Middle-earth, all power has source and consequence. The ability to bind souls to your will is not merely a skill. It is a choice about the nature of existence itself. Jinwoo thought about that, about the system and the way it had changed him level by level until he could do things that should have been impossible. I don't bind souls, he said finally. The things I raise aren't the original creatures. They're copies, echoes. The soul is already gone. And how do you know this? Because I can feel the difference. A living enemy has will intention, the ability to surprise me. My shadows have none of that. They're extensions of my intent, nothing more. Gandalf considered this, stroking his beard. An important distinction, if true. Though I wonder, do you truly know where the line lies? Or have you simply convinced yourself that what you do is different from what the necromancer of Dol Guldur practiced? The question hit harder than Jinwoo expected. He thought about every shadow he'd raised, every soldier who'd followed his commands without question or complaint. I wonder about it, he admitted, every time I use this ability. But wondering doesn't change what needs to be done. Monsters don't stop spawning because I'm having a philosophical crisis. Gandalf's expression softened slightly. Honest doubt is the beginning of wisdom, and practical necessity is the burden of those who fight. I do not envy your position, Sung Jinwoo. The use of his full name was deliberate, a gesture of recognition, perhaps even respect. What matters, Gandalf continued, is not the nature of your power, but the will that guides it. I have known wizards who wielded terrible forces for righteous purpose, and I have known healers who used gentle arts to serve corruption. The tool matters less than the hand that holds it. He turned to face Jinwoo directly. So I ask you plainly, does the darkness serve you, or do you serve it? The same question Faramir had asked, phrased differently, but cutting to the same core. Jinwoo thought about his answer carefully. This wasn't a man who would accept comfortable lies. The shadows obey me completely, he said. They have no will to serve. But that doesn't mean I'm immune to corruption. Every time I use this ability, I feel the weight of it. The responsibility. The knowledge that if I slip, if I start seeing people as potential shadows instead of lives worth protecting, I'll become exactly what you fear. And what prevents that slip? Jinwoo pulled out his dead phone. Phone held it up, this. My family. The promise I made to come home. As long as I remember what I'm fighting for, the shadows stay tools instead of becoming who I am. Gandalf studied the device with curiosity. A talisman of remembrance. Crude, perhaps, but effective. Many heroes have been anchored by less. He turned to Faramir. You were right to bring him to me, and I am satisfied with what I have seen. To Jinwoo. You may walk freely in Minas Tirith, though I advise discretion in the use of your abilities. The people here are frightened, and fear makes even good men dangerous. Show them restraint, and they will learn to trust the character beneath the power. Jinwoo inclined his head. Not quite a bow, but acknowledgement of wisdom offered. I have one condition, Gandalf added. Of course you do. Gandalf almost smiled. You will not raise the dead of Gondor. No matter the circumstance, no matter the tactical advantage, our honored dead deserve rest, not servitude. Even willing servitude. Jinwoo thought about that, about the tactical cost of limiting his resources, about the moral weight of turning allies into shadows. Agreed, he said. I only raise enemies anyway. Allies deserve better. Wise. Then we have an understanding. Gandalf turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. This world, you come from these gates and monsters and hunters. Tell me, does your world have gods? The question caught Jinwoo off guard. Not in the way you might mean. We have power systems forces we don't fully understand. But gods? No one's proven they exist. Interesting, Gandalf murmured. In Middle-earth, the unseen hand of providence moves often, though rarely in ways that make sense until long after events have passed. I wonder if your arrival here is mere accident, or if something larger is at work. I try not to think about it, Jinwoo admitted. Keeps me from going crazy. A sensible philosophy. Gandalf departed staff, tapping against stone, leaving Jinwoo and Faramir alone on the balcony. Faramir exhaled slowly. That went better than I expected. What were you expecting? For him to reject you outright? Or worse, to see something in you that required immediate action? Gandalf does not suffer threats to the free peoples lightly. And he didn't see a threat. Faramir shook his head. He saw a man carrying a terrible burden with as much grace as can be expected. That is enough for now. They stood in silence, watching the city prepare for a war that Jinwoo was only beginning to understand. Tell me about this enemy, Jinwoo said. The one everyone keeps referencing, but no one explains. Faramir's expression darkened. Sauron, the Dark Lord, an ancient evil that has plagued these lands for ages beyond counting. He seeks dominion over all free peoples to enslave them to his will and remake the world in his image of perfect order and perfect tyranny. Sounds familiar. You have faced such things in your world? Different names, same concept. There's always someone who thinks their vision of order justifies any atrocity. Faramir nodded slowly. Then you understand why we fight. Not for glory or conquest, but because the alternative is unthinkable. Yeah, Jinwoo said quietly. I understand. He thought about Seoul, about the gates that had shattered his world and forced people like him to become weapons against chaos. About the association and the politics and the endless grind of violence that never quite ended. Different world. Same fight. Come, Faramir said. I will show you to quarters where you can rest. Tomorrow we attend a war council. The steward will want to know what resources we have at our disposal, and like it or not, you are now counted among them. I'm not a resource. Faramir's smile was grim. We are all resources in wartime. The question is whether we are spent wisely or wasted foolishly. They walked back through the citadel, past soldiers and servants who watched Jinwoo with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. He ignored them, focusing instead on the weight of what he'd just agreed to. 2 weeks had become indefinite. A test had become recruitment. And somewhere in the process he'd gone from prisoner to ally in a war he didn't fully understand. But Gandalf's question echoed in his mind. Does the darkness serve you, or do you serve it? Jinwoo didn't have a complete answer. He just knew that as long as he kept asking the question, kept doubting, kept remembering his family waiting in Seoul, he could hold the line. The shadows would serve him. They didn't get a choice. But he did. And every day he chose to stay human, despite everything that pulled him towards something colder and darker. That night in quarters that felt too large and too quiet, Jinwoo stood at the window and looked out at Minas Tirith. Somewhere beyond the mountains, an enemy gathered. Somewhere in another world entirely, his family waited. He'd made a promise. He'd keep it. The method was just taking longer than expected, and getting more complicated by the day. The war council had lasted 3 hours, and accomplished nothing Jinwoo hadn't already guessed. Mordor's forces were gathering. The siege would come soon. Gondor's allies were scattered or delayed. Every strategic option led to the same conclusion: they would stand, and they would bleed, and victory would depend on courage more than numbers. Jinwoo had sat through it all, listening to men debate tactics that felt painfully familiar. Different world, different weapons, same desperate mathematics of insufficient forces against overwhelming odds. Now, standing on Minas Tirith's walls, as dawn broke over the Pelennor fields, he watched those mathematics become real. The army of Mordor spread across the plains like a stain. Tens of thousands, maybe more. Orcs in ragged formations, trolls hauling siege engines, creatures Jinwoo didn't have names for. And behind them, all the banners of a darkness that had been gathering strength while Gondor's allies failed to arrive. Beside him, Faramir stood silent. The ranger's face carried the weight of a man watching his home prepare to die. "The Rohirrim will come," Faramir said quietly. King Theoden gave his word. Jinwoo glanced at him. "And if they don't? Then we hold the walls as long as we can. Make the enemy pay for every stone. Practical, grim, the voice of someone who'd already accepted the cost and was just trying to minimize it." Jinwoo looked back at the approaching host. He'd fought in raids before coordinated strikes against S-rank gates with multiple hunter guilds. But this was different. This wasn't a dungeon with defined rules and a boss at the end. This was an actual army trying to break an actual city, and the people inside were counting on soldiers, not hunters, to save them. "Where do you need me?" he asked. Faramir pointed to the second tier. "There. When they breach the first wall, and they will, the fighting becomes close and brutal. Your shadows excel at that kind of engagement. But remember Gandalf's warning: restraint. We need allies who inspire courage, not terror." Jinwoo nodded. He'd already planned for this. Ygritte would hold defensive positions. Beru would eliminate key threats. Tusk would control choke points. Clean, efficient. No unnecessary displays of power that would make Gondor's soldiers question who the real enemy was. The gates shuddered as the first siege tower made contact. Somewhere below, men shouted orders that would be forgotten in the chaos. Arrows flew in both directions, a deadly exchange, where every shot mattered because there were never enough arrows. Jinwoo descended into the city, moving against the flow of civilians being evacuated to higher tiers. They watched him pass the stranger in dark clothing, who moved like violence waiting to happen. Some made signs he didn't recognize, probably wards against evil. He ignored them. Fear was useful. It kept people alert. The second tier's main gate was a choke point between stone walls that funneled attackers into kill zones. Smart design. But design only worked if you had enough defenders to hold it. Jinwoo counted maybe 50 soldiers. Good men, probably. Brave, certainly. But against thousands, they'd last minutes, maybe less. He reached for the shadows. Ygritte materialized beside him, armor solid and blade ready. The knight's presence shifted the defenders' attention immediately. Some reached for weapons before they recognized Faramir's seal on Jinwoo's cloak. "That's the shadow warrior," someone muttered. "The one who killed 50 orcs. Is he with us or against us?" Faramir vouched for him. That's enough for me. Jinwoo tuned them out. Trust would come or it wouldn't. Right now the gate mattered more. The first wall fell an hour after dawn. The sound of stone cracking carried through the city like a death knell. Jinwoo felt it through the ground, the vibration of tons of masonry, giving way under coordinated assault. Then they came. Orcs poured through the breach, screaming in their grinding language, weapons high. Behind them trolls with battering rams. Behind them more orcs than Jinwoo cared to count. The Gondorian soldiers formed shield walls, spears forward. Discipline holding against numerical impossibility. It wouldn't last. Jinwoo pulled Baru and Tusk from the darkness. The Ant Commander's appearance drew gasps from the defenders, but there was no time for explanations. Baru, he commanded. Trolls first, fast and quiet. The shadow vanished, moving through the chaos with predatory efficiency. Jinwoo felt the kills register as Baru carved through troll handlers, dropping the massive creatures into confusion before they could organize. Tusk, he continued. Hold the left flank. Area denial only. No pursuit. The polearm warrior shifted position, and suddenly the orcs' advance on that side faltered. Not from visible violence, but from Tusk's presence creating a zone where movement became difficult and panic set in. Ygritte remained at Jinwoo's side, ready but patient. The Gondorian soldiers watched this coordination with expressions ranging from awe to unease. Jinwoo ignored them, focusing on the tactical picture. Baru was handling the heavy threats. Tusk was buying time on the flank. That left the center where orcs were starting to push through Gondor's lines. Jinwoo pulled Kamish's wrath from shadow. The daggers felt light in his hands, almost eager. He moved. Not the overwhelming slaughter he could have unleashed. Just efficient removal of problems. An orc breaking through the line dead. A troll trying to flank dead, threats eliminated with the minimum necessary violence. The soldiers noticed. Started working around him, using his presence as an anchor point. The line stabilized, then held, then pushed back. For 3 hours they held the gate. Jinwoo cycled his shadows, dismissing Tusk when mana costs started climbing. Keeping Ygritte because the knight's discipline matched Gondor's soldiers perfectly. The defenders started treating Ygritte like one of their own, calling out threats and coordinating without conscious thought. Then the horn sounded. Different from Gondor's call. Deeper. Coming from beyond the walls from the Pelennor fields, where Mordor's host still held ground. The defenders paused, trying to identify the sound. Jinwoo knew what it meant before the first rider appeared. Cavalry. Lots of it. The Rohirrim crashed into Mordor's flank like divine intervention, wrapped in horseflesh and spears. Thousands of riders moving in formations that spoke of generations perfecting the art of mounted warfare. They tore through orc lines like paper momentum and fury, overwhelming superior numbers through sheer audacity. At their head, an old man in armor that gleamed even through the dust. King Jinwoo thought. Had to be. The orcs at the gate faltered, caught between enemies. The Gondorian soldiers saw the opening and surged forward, pressing the advantage. Jinwoo recalled Baru, and Ygritte felt the mana drainies. The tide had shifted. Gondor didn't need his shadows right now. They needed to remember they could win on their own. He climbed to a vantage point, watching the cavalry charge evolve. The Rohirrim fought with reckless courage, the kind that inspired songs or early graves. Maybe both. Then the sky darkened. Not clouds. Wings. Massive, leathery carrying riders that radiated wrongness even at this distance. Nazgul, someone whispered. The Nine. Jinwoo felt it before he saw it, a pressure against his mind, like the mental probe Gandalf had used, but infinitely more malicious. This wasn't testing. This was assault designed to break will and scatter thoughts into terror. Around him, soldiers collapsed. Not physically wounded. Just broken minds unable to process the weight of despair being pressed into their skulls. Jinwoo pushed back the same way he'd resisted Gandalf. His will forged in dungeons where hesitation meant death held firm. But the Rohirrim weren't so lucky. Horses screamed and threw riders. Formation scattered. The charge faltered as the Nazgul descended, and Jinwoo watched courage evaporate under supernatural fear. One of the 9 focused on what looked like a smaller rider. Not the king, but someone important. The creature dove, and its mount some twisted mockery of life, open jaws that could swallow a man whole. Jinwoo was moving before conscious thought finished. He couldn't reach the field in time. The walls were too high, the distance too far. But his shadows could. Igris, he commanded, appeared already in motion, sprinting across stone and air like gravity was optional. The knight hit the Nazgul's mount from the side blade, carving through wing membrane. The creature shrieked more rage than pain. The small rider, a woman Jinwoo realized, rolled clear of the snapping jaws. But the Nazgul itself turned toward Igris, and Jinwoo felt the pressure redouble. This thing wasn't just strong. It was ancient, powerful, carrying the weight of ages spent in service to darkness. Igris held position, but struggled. The Shadow Warrior's will was Jinwoo's will, but even that had limits against this kind of focused malevolence. Jinwoo reached deeper, pulling more strength than was wise. Felt the mana cost spike as he reinforced Igris with everything he had. Hold, he commanded. Just hold. The knight didn't respond in words. Just obeyed, becoming a wall of pure refusal against the Nazgul's assault. The woman found her feet, drew a sword that looked too heavy for her frame, and charged the Nazgul like death was just another obstacle to overcome. Jinwoo wanted to stop her, wanted to call out that this thing would kill her, that courage wasn't enough against immortal evil. But he was too far away, and she was already committed. She moved with skill that surprised him. Not the raw strength of someone trying to overpower an opponent, but the precise technique of someone who knew exactly where to strike. Her blade found the Nazgul's neck, drove through ancient armor, bit deep into whatever passed for flesh beneath. The creature's shriek could have shattered glass. It stumbled backward, and the woman pressed the attack with relentless determination. Then Jinwoo felt it. The moment the Nazgul's focus shifted from Igris to the woman. The full weight of its malice concentrated on this one person who had dared to wound it. She was already swaying, the mental assault taking its toll. Jinwoo made a decision. Beru, he called. Protect her. The ant commander appeared behind the woman. Mandibles spread in a threat display that would have terrified anything with functional survival instincts. The Nazgul paused. Not from fear, these things didn't fear, but from calculation, recognizing a threat it hadn't anticipated. That hesitation cost it. The woman's sword found its mark again this time, driving through the Nazgul's helm. The creature convulsed ancient power, unraveling, and then collapsed into nothing but robes and darkness dissipating in sunlight. The woman stood over its remains, breathing hard. Then her legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees. Beru stood guard while Jinwoo recalled Igris. The knight appeared at his side, slightly translucent from the strain of holding against a Nazgul's assault. Well done, Jinwoo murmured. Igris inclined his head. No words needed. On the field below, the remaining Nazgul withdrew. The death of one of their own had changed the calculus. The Rohirrim rallied, pressing their advantage. Jinwoo watched the woman being helped to her feet by soldiers who looked at her with something approaching worship. She'd just done something that shouldn't be possible, killed one of the 9 with mortal steel and courage. He'd helped. Created the opening, held the line long enough for her to finish it. But the victory was hers, and the story would remember it that way. Good. The last thing he needed was credit for stealing someone else's defining moment. Faramir appeared at his shoulder, breathing hard from climbing the stairs. You held the gate. We held the gate, Jinwoo corrected. Your soldiers did the work, with your shadows guarding their flanks. Faramir's tone carried something new. Not quite friendship, but respect earned in blood. I will not forget that. The fighting continued through the day, but the tide had turned. The Rohirrim's charge had broken Mordor's center. Gondor's defenders held the walls. And somewhere in the chaos, reinforcements arrived, ships from the south, carrying men who'd thought they were coming to a siege, but found a battlefield instead. By nightfall, the Pelennor fields were clear. The cost had been horrific. Bodies covered the plains, and the wounded filled every building that could hold them. Victory, yes, but the kind that made you wonder if losing might have hurt less. Jinwoo found a quiet corner on the 3rd tier, away from the celebrations and mourning that always followed victory. His mana reserves were dangerously low, maintaining 3 shadows through hours of sustained combat in a world that resisted his power had pushed him to limits he hadn't tested since fighting the Demon King. He pulled out his dead phone, looked at the blank screen, wondered if his family was looking at the sky right now, hoping he'd find his way home. I'm trying, he thought. Just taking longer than expected. Gandalf found him there as stars emerged above the battlefield. You fought with restraint, the wizard observed. I watched from the walls. You could have unleashed far more destruction, yet you chose to support rather than dominate. Jinwoo didn't look up from the phone. They didn't need me to win. They needed help not losing. There's a difference. Wise. Gandalf settled onto the wall beside him, staff resting across his knees. The woman you protected. Did you know who she was? Number Éowyn, niece of Theoden King. She rode to war in secret, refusing to be left behind while her people fought. Today, she slew the Witch King of Angmar, a feat no man could accomplish. Jinwoo thought about the woman's determination, the way she'd charged an immortal terror without hesitation. She would have done it without me. Perhaps. But your shadows bought her the seconds she needed. In battle, seconds are the currency of life and death. They sat in silence for a while, watching smoke rise from funeral pyres. This war isn't over, Gandalf said eventually. The Pelennor was a battle, not the war. Sauron still commands vast forces, and his eye turns toward a final confrontation. Jinwoo looked at him. You're about to ask me to go somewhere dangerous. Gandalf's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. The Black Gate. Mordor's primary fortress. We march there in 3 days with what forces we can muster. Not to conquer, we lack the strength, but to draw Sauron's attention while others complete a task that may end this war. A diversion, a desperate gambit that will likely end in death for all who participate. Jinwoo thought about Seoul, about his family and the promise he'd made. Going to Mordor meant risking everything on someone else's plan. But it also meant getting closer to answers, to understanding this world enough to find a way home. I'm in, he said. Gandalf nodded slowly. I thought you might be. You have the eyes of someone who understands necessary sacrifice. Jinwoo slipped the phone back into his pocket. I just want to go home. If marching to the Black Gate gets me closer to that, I'll march. A pragmatic motivation. Sometimes the best kind. The wizard stood staff tapping against stone. Rest. Recover your strength. In 3 days we face the eye of Sauron itself. He departed, leaving Jinwoo alone with the stars and the distant sounds of a city trying to remember how to breathe after nearly choking on despair. Jinwoo closed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion settle into his bones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. 3 days from now, he'd walk into Mordor itself. But tonight he let himself think about Seoul. About his mother's tea and his sister's sarcasm and the small apartment that meant more than any victory ever could. He'd get back. He always did. The method was just requiring more patience than usual, and significantly more bloodshed. 3 days of preparation felt like 3 minutes. The host of the West assembled with grim efficiency 7,000 men who knew they were marching to their deaths, but went anyway. Aragorn led them. The ranger Jinwoo had seen briefly during the Pelennor, now wearing authority like a second skin. Gandalf rode at his side, white robes stark against the army's darker colors. Jinwoo marched with the rear guard positioned where his shadows could respond to threats from any direction. Faramir had vouched for him one final time before the march, and the soldiers had accepted his presence with the wary respect reserved for weapons they didn't fully understand, but needed anyway. The journey took days. Through lands that had been green once, but now bore the scars of Mordor's poisoning. The air tasted wrong, thick with ash, and the kind of corruption that seeped into lungs and stayed there. Jinwoo felt the wrongness in his mana too. The resistance he'd experienced since arriving in Middle-earth intensified the closer they got to Mordor. Like the world itself was rejecting him harder, pushing back against power that didn't belong. By the time they reached the Black Gate, his reserves were half what they should be just from existing in this place. The Morannon rose before them like a monument to the futility of hope. Black iron and stone built to dimensions that suggested builders who cared more about intimidation than practicality. Behind it, the mountains of Mordor loomed, and somewhere in that wasteland, the eye watched. Jinwoo could feel it. Not physically, but as pressure against his mind. Constant, searching, looking for weakness it could exploit. He'd felt similar things in high-ranked dungeons. Boss monsters with mental abilities trying to break hunters before the fighting even started. This was worse. More focused, like being examined by something that had spent millennia perfecting the art of psychological warfare. The host deployed in formation before the gate. Not attacking, just standing there. Visible, obvious. A challenge too blatant to ignore. Aragorn rode forward with heralds demanding Sauron's surrender, with words everyone knew were meaningless. The real message was simpler. We're here. Come deal with us. The gate opened. What emerged wasn't an army. It was a tide of malice given form. Orcs in numbers that made the Pelennor forces look like a scouting party. Trolls armored in black iron. Creatures Jinwoo didn't have names for things that looked like nightmares had bred with worse nightmares. And above it all, the eye. Jinwoo saw it now, manifested in a way he hadn't before. Not a physical eye, but presence made visible. Attention incarnate, focused and terrible, and absolutely certain of its dominion. It saw him. The moment stretched. Jinwoo felt the full weight of Sauron's awareness crash into him like a physical blow. This thing had ruled for ages, had bent nations to its will, had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms. It recognized Jinwoo as for another, a piece that didn't fit its perfect order. And it wanted him gone. The mental assault made the Nazgul's attack feel like a gentle suggestion. This was command backed by eons of absolute authority demanding submission with the certainty that resistance was futile. Jinwoo's answer was simple. No. Not defiance spoken aloud. Just pure refusal forged in dungeons where yielding meant death. And the only option was to keep pushing forward until something broke. The eye's attention intensified. Jinwoo felt pressure building behind his eyes and his skull, trying to crack him open and scoop out whatever made him resist. He reached for his shadows. The summoning came harder than ever before. Mordor's influence fought him, trying to prevent the darkness from answering anyone but Sauron. But Jinwoo had been commanding shadows since before he understood what that meant. And his will wasn't something this world could simply override. Egress appeared armor gleaming dull in Mordor's poisoned light. Beru materialized all predatory hunger and lethal intent. Tusk rose behind them, polearm ready. And with them came 100 lesser shadows. Orcs Jinwoo had killed during the march trolls from the Pelennor creatures from a dozen skirmishes. Not his strongest soldiers, but numerous, visible. An army of darkness that served the wrong master. The eye's fury was palpable. This was defiance it couldn't tolerate. A shadow wielder standing before the gates of Mordor commanding the dead against their rightful lord. Sauron's host surged forward. The host of the West met them with desperate courage. 7,000 against hundreds of thousands, holding a line that should have broken in seconds, but held through sheer refusal to accept the inevitable. Jinwoo didn't join the front line. His task was different. He kept his shadows visible, kept them moving, kept them creating the illusion of reinforcements that didn't exist. Every 100 he displayed suggested thousands more waiting. Every formation shift implied fresh reserves. It was a lie, a bluff backed by nothing but Jinwoo's ability to maintain the deception. But Sauron saw it and had to respond. The eye's attention, which should have been omnidirectional, locked onto Jinwoo, trying to understand this threat to calculate how many shadow warriors this foreign power could actually command. That focus cost Sauron. Jinwoo didn't know what task Gandalf had mentioned, didn't know who was sneaking where or what they hoped to accomplish, but he understood distraction, understood drawing aggro, understood making yourself the most important target in the room. So he held the eye's attention and refused to break. The cost was brutal. Maintaining hundreds of shadows in Mordor itself under Sauron's direct opposition, burned through mana faster than Jinwoo had ever experienced. He felt reserves draining, felt the exhaustion building, felt his controls starting to fray at the edges. But he held. Minutes passed like hours. The host of the West bled and died and held their ground through courage that defied logic. Aragorn's voice cut through the chaos, rallying men who should have been broken. Gandalf's staff blazed with light that pushed back the darkness, buying seconds that accumulated into minutes. And Jinwoo stood in the center of his shadow army, burning everything he had to maintain a lie that kept the eye focused on him instead of whatever desperate gambit was playing out somewhere in Mordor's depths. Then the world changed. Jinwoo felt it before he understood it. A shift in the fundamental nature of reality around him, like a weight being suddenly removed. The pressure of Sauron's presence, constant since they'd entered these lands, flickered. The eye wavered. For a moment, confusion replaced certainty. Sauron's attention, absolute and unwavering, stuttered like a candle in wind. Jinwoo didn't know what had happened, but he recognized opportunity. He pushed every remaining shadow forward, abandoning tactical restraint for overwhelming visual presence. The illusion of infinite reinforcements all converging on the black gate at once. The eye's focus snapped back to him, but different now. Weaker, uncertain. Then it screamed, not sound. Something worse, the psychic death cry of a being that had existed for millennia, feeling its foundation crumble. Jinwoo staggered under the weight of it, felt blood vessel burst in his nose from the pressure. Around him, Mordor's host faltered. Orcs looked around in confusion. Trolls stopped mid-swing. The coordinated malice that had driven them dissolved into chaos. And the eye began to collapse. Jinwoo saw it happening in real time. Sauron's presence vast and terrible, fragmenting. Not dying something this old couldn't simply die, but breaking apart, losing cohesion, scattering into pieces that would take eons to reassemble if they ever could. He made a choice. Chains of midnight, he commanded, pulling on reserves he didn't have and finding them anyway. The shadows responded. Not his soldiers, but the fundamental darkness that answered his call. It surged forward, wrapping around the fragmenting essence of Sauron's will like black iron chains forged from night itself. The eye's remnants struggled, tried to disperse, tried to sink into Mordor's stone and wait for another age. Jinwoo didn't let it. He compressed the chains, drawing them tight, felt Sauron's hatred beating against the binding, felt malice that had toppled kingdoms trying to break free. But the One Ring was destroyed. Jinwoo didn't know how he knew that, but the knowledge was absolute. Sauron's anchor was gone. His power untethered his will, just fragments of what it had been. And fragments could be contained. The chains pulled tighter. The eye's essence scattered and desperate coalesced into something smaller, more manageable. Still terrible, still carrying the weight of uncounted atrocities, but bound, trapped. Jinwoo pulled it into his own shadow, felt the mass of concentrated malevolence settle into the darkness he commanded. Not absorbed, he wasn't fool enough to try consuming something like this. Just imprisoned, locked away, where it couldn't reform or rebuild. Sauron's last vestige of will hammered against the binding, screaming defiance that would probably never stop. Jinwoo sealed it anyway. The battlefield went silent. Mordor's host stood frozen, their master's voice suddenly gone from their minds. Some fled, others simply collapsed, purpose stripped away so completely that death seemed preferable to the emptiness left behind. The host of the West stared in disbelief. They'd come here to die, buying time for a miracle, and somehow the miracle had happened. Gandalf appeared at Jinwoo's side, moving faster than his age suggested possible. The wizard's eyes were wide, studying Jinwoo with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something that shouldn't exist. "What did you do?" Gandalf demanded. Jinwoo wiped blood from his nose, feeling exhaustion settle into his bones like lead. What needed to be done? "The ring's destroyed, right? I felt it happen, yes. Frodo succeeded. But Sauron should have simply dissipated, become spirit without form, malice without power. Instead I locked him away." Jinwoo tapped his chest where shadows writhed with unusual agitation. "He's in here now. Sealed. Can't reform. Can't spread. Can't do whatever it is disembodied Dark Lords do when they're waiting to come back." Gandalf's expression was unreadable. "You have taken into yourself the essence of the enemy. The concentrated hatred of ages, the will that sought to enslave all free peoples. Do you understand what you carry now?" Jinwoo thought about the shadows he already commanded. The soldiers who had no choice but to obey the power that walked the line between tool and corruption. "Just one more shadow," he said quietly. "One I'll never let out." The wizard studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You have done what I would not have dared attempt. Saved Middle-earth from the possibility of Sauron's return. But the cost? I'll deal with the cost. Jinwoo looked at the dissolving army, the chaos spreading, as Mordor's infrastructure collapsed without its master's will holding it together. Right now, we have an army to get home safely. Indeed. They withdrew from the Morannon, the host of the West, moving in stunned silence. Victory felt hollow when it came from a source no one understood and a method that looked too much like the enemy's arts. Jinwoo marched at the rear again, feeling Sauron's essence testing his binding with tireless malice. It would never stop trying to break free, never stop whispering poison, never stop being exactly what it had always been, the antithesis of freedom, the desire for absolute control. Good thing Jinwoo had practiced ignoring things that tried to corrupt him. Back in Minas Tirith, celebration erupted. The war was over. Sauron defeated. Middle-earth saved by a chain of miracles that no one could quite believe. Jinwoo avoided the festivities, found a quiet room in the citadel where he could finally stop pretending he wasn't exhausted, down to his soul. Faramir found him there. The city calls you hero, the ranger said quietly, the man who held the enemy's attention while the ring-bearer completed his task. Jinwoo didn't look up from where he sat back against cold stone. I'm not anyone's hero, just someone who was in the right place to be useful. Perhaps. Faramir settled beside him. But usefulness at the right moment is often what separates victory from defeat. I came to say thank you, and to ask what you will do now. Go home. Jinwoo pulled out his dead phone, looked at the blank screen. If I can figure out how. Faramir was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about that. The gate that brought you here, it was a tear in the fabric of reality, yes. A breach between worlds, yeah. Then perhaps another breach could send you back. Jinwoo looked at him. You know how to do that, no. But Gandalf might. He understands the deeper workings of this world in ways I never will. Worth asking. They sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of a city that had forgotten what peace sounded like. Later, Gandalf confirmed what Jinwoo had hoped. The red gate that brought you here was a wound in reality. Those wounds can sometimes be encouraged to reopen with the right application of power. Jinwoo felt something in his chest loosen slightly. How long days, perhaps? I must prepare the ritual carefully. Middle-earth's boundaries are still fragile from the war, but it can be done. Jinwoo nodded. Days he could handle. After weeks in this world, a few more days felt manageable. The ritual took place 3 days later on the same Pelennor fields where Jinwoo had fought beside Gondor's defenders. Gandalf drew symbols Jinwoo didn't recognize, spoke words in languages that predated human civilization. And slowly, carefully, reality began to tear. Jinwoo felt it, the familiar wrongness of a gate opening, the pressure of worlds, trying to occupy the same space. Different from the red gates he knew, but similar enough to be recognizable. Through the tear he caught glimpses of Seoul. His city, his world unchanged and waiting. This will close quickly, Gandalf warned. Once you pass through, there is no coming back. Understood. Jinwoo turned to Faramir, who stood watching with the same measuring gaze he'd worn when they first met. Thank you for trusting me when you had no reason to. You earned that trust. Faramir extended his hand. Fight well, sung Jinwoo, in your world and mine. They shook warrior to warrior, Jinwoo stepped toward the tear, then paused, looked back at Gandalf. The thing I'm carrying, Sauron. Will it be a problem in my world? Gandalf's expression was grave. That remains to be seen. But you have bound it well, and your will is strong. Guard it carefully, and it may remain nothing more than a memory of evil defeated. I'll guard it. I know you will. Jinwoo stepped through the tear. Reality twisted, compressed, pulled him through spaces that weren't spaces, and past rules that weren't rules. For a moment he existed nowhere, caught between worlds, with nothing but his will holding him together. Then Seoul's air hit his lungs, and he stumbled onto familiar concrete. The gate closed behind him with a sound like reality, sighing in relief. Jinwoo looked around. Downtown Seoul night, the same street where he'd entered the red gate. Association barriers were still up, hunters still on watch. One of them saw him and shouted. Others converged, questions flying faster than Jinwoo could process. He ignored them all, pulling out his phone. Still dead circuits fried by dimensional transit. But he was home. The association would have questions. The guild would want reports. Everyone would demand explanations for where he'd been and what had happened. Later, right now he had a promise to keep. Jinwoo walked through Seoul's streets, feeling the familiar press of the city around him. No resistance to his mana here. No wrongness in the air. Just home exactly as he'd left it. He reached his apartment building as dawn painted the sky gray. Took the stairs instead of the elevator because he needed the time to prepare himself. At his door he paused. Heard movement inside his mother, already awake, probably making tea. His sister's alarm going off, ignored for 5 more minutes of sleep. Normal. Ordinary. Everything he'd fought to get back to. Jinwoo opened the door. His mother looked up from the kitchen teacup, halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then she set the cup down very carefully. "Don't make me wait again," she said quietly. The same words from a lifetime ago. "I'm home," Jinwoo replied. Jinna burst out of her room, saw him, and her expression cycled through relief. Anger and something that might have been tears she refused to let fall. She punched his arm, hard. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks and no word, and the association said they couldn't find you, and I know. I'm sorry. You'd better be. But she was hugging him now, and he could feel her shaking. Jinwoo held his family, felt the weight of Sauron's essence writhing in his shadow, and knew that some prices were worth paying. He was home. Finally. And the method had been exactly as complicated as he'd expected.